In this topic, we'll try to understand testing a web-based system. So we need to discuss about how the testing of a web-based system is different from the testing traditional software, challenges in testing web-based system, and how testing is carried out on a web-based software. So the web-based software system consists of set of web pages and components that interact to form a system which executes using web servers, network, HTTP, and a browser. The user typically interact with a website through an internet browser, and some of the terms which is associated with this system is what is a web page? Web page is the information that can be viewed in a single browser window. And a website is a collection of such web pages and associated software components. A web application is a program that runs as a whole or part in one or more web servers and that can be run by users through a web site. Web systems are based on client-server architecture. So these systems share some characteristics of client-server architecture. Still, there are a number of aspects of web system that necessitate having a different technique to test them. The clients of traditional client-server systems are platform specific. This means that a client application is developed and tested for each supported client operating system. That means if a software is developed for a Windows platform, it needs to be tested only on Windows platform and it is intended to use on Windows platform. Whereas a web application can be accessed from different operating systems using different browsers which actually render the HTML page. So these browsers can be developed by different companies and they can be different versions. So we are seeing that it is dynamic, very dynamic, like both hardware, operating system, software, everything is changing. So it introduces a lot of incompatibility and interoperability issues. Also, the web page flow is depend on the user. In a traditional application, a flow control is built in the system and user is bound to follow that flow. But if you're using a web client, you are free to break the flow at any point. You can refresh the window, you can click the back button, and there are numerous links available in the system which can take control outside the current page. So it is very dynamic and it is very difficult to predict the complete flow. So these scenarios makes the testing of web-based software different from a traditional software. Let's discuss some of the challenges in testing web-based software. So one is diversity and complexity. Web applications interact with the many components that run on different hardware and software platforms. These components are written in different languages and they are based on different programming approaches such as procedural or object-oriented programming. There are two components. There is a server-side component and there is a client-side component. The client-side components include browsers. There are different browsers available. Then HTML code. then client-side scripting languages like JavaScript, then applets, etc. The server side includes components such as or programming components developed using different programming languages such as CGI, Java Server Pages, Java Servlets, .NET Technologies, etc. So they all interact with the different backend engines and other components that are found on the web server. Next is dynamic environment. The dynamic aspect is mainly due to uncertainty in the program behavior, changes in application requirements, and rapidly evolving web technology. We have already discussed about the difficulty to determine the application's control flow because the control flow is highly dependent on the user input and the user can break the normal control flow by pressing the back button or refresh button in. Let's see how changes in application requirements affect the testing. The websites normally start simple with 3 or 4 pages, and over the period of time more pages get added, more functionality get added, and hence it become a sizable software very rapidly, and we need to test all these components end to end and every time when we make a change. Also, the web technology used for development is evolving much rapidly. So the new version of the components are getting released on a day-to-day basis. Hence, we need to test for different versions of the components used in the development. So these three things make the environment very dynamic and it makes it unique in the testing of web-based software. Next one is very short development time. As said earlier, the requirements for websites starts as simple as 2 or 3 pages, and over the period of time it more functionality get added to it. Why? Because the clients of web-based systems impose a very short development time and they want the software or the web application to be available for their clients as quickly as possible. So for that we may go by feature and we have less features, less number of features in the initial release, and we keep on adding more and more features over the period of time. So we get a very short time for development and we need to make very quick releases. And all these leads to continuous evolution. So the demand for more functionality and capacity after the system has been designed and deployed means we need to extend the scope of the existing the application, and it need to support more users, more functionality. That means it adds more scalability. It need to be more scalable, otherwise it leads to scalability issues. The compatibility and interoperability issues make the website testing a difficult task. The problem of incompatibility exists on both client side and server side. The server's components can be distributed to different operating systems and there could be different versions of the software. Also, at the client side, different versions of browsers are running. Hence, it is required the web application to be tested on different browsers and on different platforms. Usually, graphics and other objects on the site need to be tested on each and every browser to know its support, how it is supported, or whether it is compatible. And there could be difference in uh, the way it appears. There will be a visual check need to be done to see the physical appearance on different browsers. These are the challenges in testing a web-based software. So how do we test the web-based system? First, we need to check whether the application works the way it is designed to do. And we need to evaluate whether it appears the same way in different web browsers. Also, we need to see some of the quality parameters like security, usability, performance, etc. The various types of web testing are interface testing, usability testing, content testing, navigation testing, configuration testing, security testing, and performance testing. Now we will see one by one in detail. In interface testing, we need to test the interfaces available at the client side as well as at the server side. The client side, we are talking mainly about the user interface using which the user is interacting with the web application. So it must be proper and flexible. The, and at the server side, there are mainly two interfaces. That is the interface between the web server and the application server, and the interface between application server and the database server. The user access the web application using browser. Let's assume a web page which is used for the login validation. So it consists of two text boxes to enter username password and two buttons to log in or to forget password. So when the user enter the username and password and click the login button, the request generated get passed through different interfaces. So it goes through the web server to the application server, then to the database server. And once the validation is completed, the data fetched from the database server is validated with the input data submitted in the application layer. So once this validation is completed, the response is passed back to the web server. Based on that response, it gets transferred to a new page where it says whether the login is success or failure. So in this scenario, the complexity of testing is to ensure that every interface works perfectly, means it passes the data correctly and receives the data correctly, as well as if an interface or layer failed, it should capture the error and display appropriate error message in the web application. So it all the interfaces should be checked, all the interactions should be checked, and all the errors should be handled properly. So if the database is returning an error, instead of showing that SQL query error in the front end, it should be cached and display user-friendly messages in the front end. Also, we need to check the compatibility. Like it could be accessed through different softwares like different browsers, and it can be run on different hardware machines and different types of networks. So all these variations has to be tested. In usability testing, we are testing the interface between the user and the web application. And this is to make sure that the user feel good and comfortable when he uses the application. So this is not a functionality testing, but the web application is reviewed and tested from a user's point of view. So if the usability is not tested, we may lose the user because of a poor design. Because if the user is not able to follow the contents in the website, if he is not able to navigate, if he is not able to find the required information to proceed to the next page, then we are going to lose the user. So there are few guidelines which is generally used for usability testing. One is we need to present the information in natural and logical order. There should be an order and clarity in the data being presented. So we need to adhere to the uniform conventions, layout, then the font typefaces, labeling, etc. We need to make sure that the user will be able to find the things and he will be able to follow it properly from one page to the another page. So the graphics, the layout should be in such a way that user should be able to follow it properly. Also, we shouldn't mix writing different topics of information. There should be a clarity, and the topics should be organized in such a way that we have to provide the general information, then provide the much deeper or specific detailed information. So user should be able to read it and understand it in a better way. And the links, navigation is a very important factor. The link should be active and there should be no error or misleading links. Otherwise, the user will not be able to navigate through the website. So these are the general guidelines used for usability testing. In content testing, we'll check the completeness and correctness of the web application content. The content provided in the website should be verified, and we need to do a fact check and make sure that we are presenting complete information as well as correct information. It should be organized and it should be presented in a readable and comfortable way. So there could be two types of content on the website, could be static content and dynamic content. The static content can be checked as part of verification. So we can review the content and make sure that it is complete and correct. Whereas the dynamic content is being generated with the help of data present in the database or from other data sources. So there also we need to make sure that the content is appropriately presented on the website. So we will see what are the points to be considered as part of static testing. So we'll check the layout of the content, how the content is presented in the web page. So if there are forms, we need to check the form for their field validation. Error messages displayed as part of a wrong input. How optional and mandatory fields are specified. So how the buttons are placed, where the buttons are placed on the form. Next, if a table is present, whether the table rows and columns are properly spaced, and displayed. So whether user will be able to distinguish the header row and the data rows. There shouldn't be any grammatical mistakes in the web page, and we need to check for any typos. That means we have mistakes as part of data entry, whether there are any typographical mistakes. We'll check how the content is organized. It's like how the paragraphs are formed and how the different sections are maintained. It checks for the consistency, whether related and linked data is presented in the page. It checks for data integrity, whether right information is provided. And it checks for either errors as part of any edits. As discussed, content accuracy and completeness is also verified. And there should be a relationship between different content being presented in the page. In case of dynamic content, that is, the content is derived from a database or from other web pages, we need to make sure that that content is correct and it is being displayed properly. For example, if you are showing weather information on web page, which is obtained from another as part of another service or from another web page, so it should be we need to make sure that that information is correctly displayed and it is always available to show the value. So we need to make sure that all the interfaces used to obtain the dynamic content is functioning properly. Compatibility testing is performed to see whether the web application works the same way in different browsers, different operating systems, servers, etc. So it is very important to see the compatibility and to make sure that it works on different platforms in the same way. So we need to consider some of the points as part of this testing. The web application has to be tested in all the major browsers to check their compatibility. Graphics and other objects need to be visually checked in different browsers. The forms, the layouts of table, colors has to be tested in different browser as well as in different resolutions. The code that execute from the browser also need to be tested. There are different version of HTML, different version of the scripting languages used in the client side as well as server side. All these need to be tested from end to end to make sure that it is working correctly. So the new technologies may not be available in the same way in all the operating systems and in all the browsers. So we need to make sure that the application works the same way in different operating systems. Security testing is performed to ensure that the data on the web applications remain confidential and there is no unauthorized access. It also ensures the users can perform only those tasks that they are authorized to perform. So web applications store very important data and the number of transactions has increased tremendously with the increase in number of users. And in the internet environment, there are a lot of challenges to protect the web application from hackers. So security testing is very important to ensure that the data is handled very confidentially. So how do we test it? We need to test the different components in the web application like the web software. client-side environment, network communication, server-side environment. All these areas there's a risk of attack. So it is important that the accessibility of the users to their client-side desktop machines has to be uh, checked, and only authorized people can access the web application. Also, we need to test the infrastructure of the server or the location where the web application is hosted. So if there is a flaw in the security of the infrastructure, or the server can be easily accessed by a hacker, then the web application can also be accessed. Also, we need to test for the vulnerabilities of the web application, whether the application has any uh, pitfalls which allow the hacker to access the data. In order to ensure the security of infrastructure, firewalls are installed on the servers, and all the ports are scanned to see any unauthorized access. On the client side, we use user authentication, encrypted use of cookies, and we use encrypted data communication. Also, the users are not allowed to browse through the directories. They are always presented with a page with to see the data. We need to understand various threat types and write test cases accordingly to perform the security testing. So one is unauthorized user or fake identity or password cracking. If the password is not strong enough or the identity details are like easily guessable by the hacker, then he can get access to the contents and the data in the software. Cross-site scripting is also creates a problem wherein like hacker can execute a script, JavaScript, on victim's browser and able to steal information stored in the cookies. Buffer overflow is another big problem. In this, the attacker overrides the memory location. Thereby, they can take the control of the application or the process, which can eventually lead to the performance or data loss, or the process itself may crash. Next is URL manipulation. The web application uses HTTP GET method to pass information between the client and the server. So the information is passed in the parameter in the query string. So the attacker can change some values in the query string and can get access to the information, or he can corrupt the data. Next, SQL injection. Hacker can put some SQL statements through the APIs to query the database. So in this way, he can get vital information from the server database. Next, denial of service. In this method, an attacker meant to shut down a machine or network, thereby making it inaccessible to its users. So these attacks are accomplished by flooding the target with a lot of traffic or sending information in such a way that the server will not be able to handle that load. So eventually overloading the memory and causing the server to fail. Performance testing is used to check whether the application is able to respond in a timely manner. So whether the application able to retrieve the information and present without any delay. It helps to identify any bottlenecks or issues in the system, and hence it can be rectified. So there are some of the metrics as being evaluated as part of performance testing, like response time, throughput, and resource utilization. So we'll see like whether these values are well reasonable within the limits, thereby ensuring the performance of the web application. There are two types of performance testing. First one is load testing. Load testing is to ensure that the system sustains at peak load. So when there are many simultaneous user requests and a large amount of simultaneous connection to the database, how the system responds to that scenario. So we need to test the application against the anticipated load and volumes during the production operation. Stress testing is performed to break the site by giving the load which is beyond its specified limits. So this helps to see how the system reacts to stress and how the system recovers in case a crash happened. So here the focus on is on to determine the performance characteristics of the system when subjected to conditions beyond those anticipated production scenario. So it also tests the performance of the system under stressful conditions with a limited memory, insufficient disk space, or, or during server failure. So this also helps to determine on what conditions an application will fail and how it will fail and how gracefully it may recover from the failure. So this summarizes various testing of web-based system.